shop somewhere in the world. Retail has always been not for the faint-hearted. It's had lots of twists and turns. It's had retailers that were ascending, it's had retailers that were descending, and that's part of the rich pageant of retailing. And because retail is so close to the consumer in every single dimension, retailers have always been the first to adopt new technology, the first to adopt to change, the first to understand where that change was coming from. And retailers at the moment are looking at a weekly, daily, monthly basis, the changes that are occurring and the implications that's having for them. And I want to look at what I classify as some radical transformations that are occurring now and that will occur in the future, that will impact retail per se, but also us as consumers. And in fact, it's a truism to say that retail is a reflection of us as consumers. We're the people that decide to spend our hard-earned money in shop A versus shop B, or physically or virtually. And as a direct result of all of our actions, lies the fate of both the high street, the virtual high street, and every single retailer that we've known to come to use and to love and to disdain and to hate all at the same time. So I want to have a look at what I've called 8 transformative arcs. Some of them are elements in a massive jigsaw puzzle, and some of them are big enough in themselves to create a whole series of radical change. And let's explore them together, and hopefully we can have a good discussion at the end as to how you feel about these, and what you think the implications of these may well have to your high street, the way in which you shop, the way in which you spend your money, the way in which you go about your lives, and the impact on your business as well. So let's first of all take a look at this whole notion. And this is the whole notion of being fast and being very fluid. Now, a lot of what I'm going to talk about has its origins well before the COVID period. If you looked really close enough, you'd find some of these trends, but you would have to look closely. But of course, what COVID has done, not just to retailing, but to businesses and indeed the way in which we go about our daily lives, has accelerated on steroids some of those trends that were there anyway. And from a business perspective and from a retail perspective, what that's enabled things, it's enabled things to happen on 2 dimensions. The first dimension is this whole notion of the requirement to be very fast. I mean, although the pandemic had its origins 3 or 4 months before the lockdown occurred in the UK, it was a very fast and furious period. That's 4 weeks before the announcement of a lockdown, and lots of things had to happen then, and lots of things had to happen afterwards. And businesses realized that actually it was possible to do things in a much quicker and a much more nimble way than they had done before. The second was, I suppose, the whole notion of fluidity of you know, one moment everybody was in an office, and the next moment we were at home. Our store staff were in stores, but the whole head office function didn't function in offices. It functioned in various different people's bedrooms, living rooms, and kitchen tables. And we all learned the ability to work quickly and in a very fluid sort of way. And what I've been observing from many retailers and other businesses is a notion now of 80% and fast is significantly better than 99% correct and never. And that was an attitude, a massive shift of attitudes of minds, And I think that is going to outlive the lockdown period. We've all realized that maybe some of the systems, the processes, the procedures that we've had in our businesses have their origins in a different time and a different environment. And now we can be significantly faster and we can be significantly fluid, more fluid than we were in the past. And that's going to make for quicker decision making. That's going to make for lots of things being trialed, tested, and it's also going to allow new innovations to be seen in retail environments at a much quicker and faster rate than they have done in the past. So that's about fast and fluid. Here, accelerated on steroids, and definitely here to stay after that. The second arc is really curious in a sense, because for the last maybe 10 years, we've had very little price inflation. In fact, we've had quite a lot of price deflation over that period. Retailers have been very slow and certainly not keen to pass on any price inflation that they've had. That has, of course, put lots of pressure on manufacturers to not increase their prices. But we are already seeing price increases being accepted by retailers, some of them being passed on as well, some retailers taking their own price movements, and the spectre of price inflation looming pretty large. Now, what impact that's going to have will, of course, depend on which sector one's in, but I think there is no doubt that we will see food price inflation and probably clothing price inflation start to creep. And as we know, once inflation starts to creep, it increases at a reasonably accelerated rate. And that will have an impact on the economics of retailing, because actually price inflation from the economics of retailing is a good thing. It's not a good thing from the consumer perspective, but it is a good thing in terms of being able to finance some of the additional costs that COVID and post-COVID is going to require spending. Of course, price inflation has an impact in terms of working capital that you have in the business as well. So from a retailer perspective, price inflation, a little bit of inflation is good. From the consumer, it's not. And once we then see a leveling out of a new level of where the prices are going to land, and I'm going to come on to talk about that a little bit later on, we will be seeing a lot of promotion activity all around that. I want to talk a little bit about the third era of digital retailing, which is an era that we are in at the moment. And if we're in the third era of digital retailing, you may well be asking, well, what on earth happened to the first era and the second era? Well, we haven't really got time to go through that maybe on another occasion, but take my word for it, we're in the third era of digital retailing. And the third era of digital retailing is very much an era where human rhythms meet algorithms, and where retailing per se will be significantly more digital, but it will feel significantly more human. And let me just give you a number of drivers as to why that's happening and why it's going to be accelerated. First of all, of course, computing power is going to become significantly more powerful. It's going to become significantly less intrusive. The second is that technology per se is going to be less visible, but we'll be able to see more. And we're moving into an era where computers have been pretty good at being able to take things that you input into it via a keyboard, and being able to make sense of that and make decisions based on that, but actually significantly poor at being able to see things and make decisions on what computers see. We are very much in that era now of visual computing, where computers via all forms of cameras will see stuff and therefore will be able to make decisions on what they see rather than what's inputted to them. And the triangulation then of voice and visual computing and AI are going to have a massive impact in the way decisions will be made in smart ways by not just companies and retailers' computer systems, but also the systems and computing power that we have at home. Our computers, and you can call them computers, call them whatever you like, our devices are going to be making decisions on our behalf before we know we actually need those decisions made. I think we are seeing in this period, anybody can be a retailer. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on, and then you surface the store itself. And the whole notion of business structures post-lockdown needing rethinking, uniting diverse teams via technology and a way to connect ideas and reinvent retail in a post-COVID world. So all those forces, as I say, many of those, or most of those, were prevalent if you look closely at them before COVID, very much going to be accelerated by the experiences that we've all had over the last year and the way in which businesses will need to transform themselves and retailers will need to do things differently in a post-COVID world. Now, I'm an ex-retailer, and the way in which we used to segment our stores was very much on the size of those stores, small stores, large stores, massive stores, out-of-town stores. I think it's important that we stop looking at store formats in relation to size, and we look at a very different way of being able to segment stores. And here's a new model for you, which is look at retail in terms of these three elements. So the face of retail, what does retail look like? You know, physical and it's virtual. The bones of retail, what are all the various different elements that interconnects the physicality and the virtual nature of that retail? Supply chain, home delivery, just a couple of those notions on the bones of retail. And then the brains of retail, you know, the data that resides within all these smart devices that's throwing off customer journey data, purchase data, consideration data, social network and communication data, huge amounts of data that's available. And those people that will do well in this era are those people, a bit like equation, it's going to be, you know, success equals a face of retail times the bones of retail and squared by the brains of retail. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the funding of the digital transformation that we have seen, and it's impossible to look at a current retailer that's still open in its physical and importantly in its virtual form without realizing that a lot of money is being channeled into taking maybe analog models or models that were analog in principle and creating and transforming those into digital transformation businesses. And that was done fast and furiously. What we're now seeing is, I suppose, where is the funding of that digital transformation coming from? And normal rules apply in this instance. And a lot of the funding for a lot of the developments that the big retailers have been making over the course of the last 20, 25 years has come in one shape or form from the supply base. And we are beginning to see that play out now, which is a lot of digital opportunities that certainly big retailers have in terms of positioning on pages, positioning on digital devices. Manufacturers are being asked to pay significant premiums to have those positions and to be within these new digital platforms. And I think we are going to see more of that take place as digital in its various different forms becomes more and more important in that sort of retailing and around, in that face, bones and brains. Digital retailing has a key place to play in all of those three elements. Now, I don't know if you've noticed it, but we've seen a significant lack of promotional activity taking place right across the retail high street since pretty much the pandemic started. We are beginning to see promotions return. So when you look at, what's going to be different, what's going to, what is the new normal? Promotions disappeared for all sorts of reasons, complicated to execute when you've got a limited amount of people in the stores. You've got a lot of latent demand, so therefore not a great deal of requirement for promotional activity. Plus both the manufacturers and the retailers had lots of issues to sort out, supply chain issues, manufacturing issues, being in stock issues, and promotional activity was very much put on the back burner. Well, now promotional activity is back. It will have a slightly different form and slightly different function to it. But as things start to normalize out, promotions will be very important. And it will certainly be important in the fashion end of the marketplace that still has quite a lot of old stock in the system that needs to get that stock flashed through as quickly as you possibly can. But of course, I think it's important to remember this particular concept going forward, which is, you know, sales are very much vanity and profit is absolute sanity. So in the quest as things start to open up and the way in which retail will by its very nature want to encourage footfall into high streets, they'll want to do things that show to their customers that they're looking after their customers' health. A lot of things that were invisible in terms of store operations, like, you know, cleaning, sanitization, hygiene, which was very much seen as something that you did outside of store hours. I think that's going to be done inside of store hours so that consumers can actually see the care and attention that retailers are taking to those very important elements. But as we see those things some things change, some things start to come back, as we see our high streets come back to reasonable footfall traffic, stores will be using every trick in the book in order to get people into the store in order to promote. And that sort of brings us back very much to the high street, which is the whole notion of the movement that we have seen over the course of the last maybe 25 years out of the local high street and into out-of-town shopping areas and shopping centres per se. Now, I think it's very true also to observe that probably over the last 10 years, but maybe the last 5 years, as it's accelerated, we as shoppers have started to fall out of love with massive, great big stores and indeed massive, great big shopping centres, places that eat up a lot of our time. And we're putting, as consumers, a lot of value on time. And we have seen over the course of the last 3 years in particular, let's say 5 maybe, if you look at a macro sort of level, a move away from the large to slightly smaller. And I think we've all witnessed, and we've done it ourselves, that over the lockdown periods, we've been shopping much more locally than we have out of our locality. Some of it due to clear government guidelines, but other things just due to the fact that we're walking more and not going in cars. And I suppose the question one has to ask is this, which is, what is the extent to which when things get back to a reasonable normality, our behaviour will change in terms of local. And I'm a great believer in the fact that local will be growing on 3 factors. The first factor is that, I mean, frankly, I'm looking forward to going back to the office as quickly as I can. But I don't think I'll be going back to the office 5 days a week. I'll probably be doing 3 days a week. And that will change the relationship between things that are done on your commuting journey and across your commuting journey and things that are done more locally. So I think that will give a long-term boost to more traffic being in your local area. The second is, of course, we have seen a massive shakedown in the multi chain operations, both in traditional retailing, clothing, and in particular food and beverage on our local high streets. There are a lot of vacant stores where landlords will be giving very good terms for new tenants, and I think that will encourage a lot of people to open interesting, proprietor-led stores. Over, not like on day one, but I think we will start to see that happening very much to the beginning of next year and across that. And I think that will give a really interesting boost to the high street, that the high street will be a much more interesting place to shop. And then thirdly, and we haven't yet seen this come into play, local authorities, I believe, will be taking a much more active management to ensure that high street stores both thrive and survive. And there are lots of reasons why they need to do that. I think those drivers will mean that local will grow in significance. It'll be a greater share of our spend as individual consumers, and also the way in which commuting patterns will change in a post-COVID world will, I think, benefit local over big commuter runs. I think we're also going to see the function and the form of the store change as well, because the store is very much going to be viewed as a medium by retailers. Point of sale, promotional activity in stores that has traditionally been done by pieces of cardboard or temporary point of sale that's been put up in stores, that is all going to be moved to digital. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. There's a massive cost in doing that. Again, normal rules apply. The suppliers will be paying for all of this. But the store itself is going to be seen as a fantastic way of being able to communicate to consumers, to switch consumers from maybe one brand to another, to communicate product differences, all being run on a central sort of basis, a bit like a TV station, with different programming coming out at different times in different parts of the stores for different durations, but again, or managed on a central basis. The store itself, your journey around the store, will be very much seen as a medium as to how can retailers and manufacturers communicate with you. Maybe some of it being done on screens within the store, some of it being done on your mobile devices and seamless handover between that, a lot of it being personalized to who you are, and the relationship that the store as a medium can develop with you as an individual. And there are a lot of very interesting trials. Tesco is doing an interesting trial at the moment on some of this. Walmart in the States just announced a massive digital screen program that they're going to introduce. I mean, they've tried it a couple of times, it's failed over the last decade, but I think it stands much greater chance of succeeding now, especially driven by those 6 factors that I showed you in terms of the technology change going on as well. I'd like to talk a little bit about value, because value is going to become, because we haven't had a great deal of inflation, value per se has become less important for retailers to be communicating. Well, we are now going to see a very different change to that, because we as consumers are not going to have as much money as we have in the past, or if we have the same amount of money, we certainly won't feel like we have as much money, because quite rightly, governments have thrown money around in order to help fight COVID. And I think that's absolutely the right thing to do, and to give people incomes who haven't got jobs to be able to survive over the last year. Of course, we all know that what government gives with one hand, they take with another. And government has already indicated to the business community that business taxation will be increased. And there is no doubt that government's take of our consumer disposable income in lots of various different forms is also going to increase in time. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on all of us as consumers in terms of a reduction in our disposable income. Now, this isn't going to happen immediately. It's going to happen in a, I hope, a responsible way by this government, but it is undoubtedly going to happen. And that means that we're all going to have to examine very carefully the value proposition that we give, both as manufacturers, as retailers, as business owners in our own rights, to our consumers. And value will rule. We're already beginning to see this start to play out. You know, why are the likes of Tesco's and Sainsbury's so aggressively price matching against Aldi and Lidl at the moment? And it's because you know, it won't be too long before, you know, there will be a real flight to value, and therefore it's very important to interrogate your value proposition until it absolutely confesses its superiority, to have a look at how you talk about value and how value is expressed. You know, it might be in a serving size as opposed to a pack size. There are very different ways of being able to talk about value. And value in essence, of course, as must be remembered, it isn't cheapness either. You know, value is the way in which you as a consumer believe that this is something that you are willing to pay, you know, a particular price or a premium to do. So that's very important to have a look at that. So that is the 8 radical transformations. Having spoken about value, I suppose I want to give a little bit of added value myself. So I'm going to throw in another transformation to get us up to 9, and that's the whole notion of direct to consumer. Pretty much everybody on this call, I'm sure, has been using direct to consumer much more than they ever did in the past. And the likes of these types of brands, TikTok and Alibaba and Amazon, who you're clearly very familiar with, JD.com in China, Douyin as well, have created interesting platforms to allow both manufacturers and producers in their own right to have a direct relationship with the consumer and bypass the traditional store. And we are going to see a rapid acceleration. I mean, a lot of people have moved to direct because that was the only route to market that they had. Some of them, you know, were even switched off by Amazon in the early days because Amazon deemed them as a non-essential product. So having gone from, you know, an interesting distribution ability to do something through Amazon, they suddenly found that was choked off from them. So they had to create their own D2C, direct-to-consumer, various different propositions. So that's going to grow. But it's very important to really understand that direct-to-consumer is not about having a bigger and bigger buy button on your website. Direct-to-consumer is absolutely a state of mind. If you have a look and if you interrogate those direct-to-consumer brands that have been really successful, there are a number of key criterias in which those businesses run and operate their business. You know, their closeness to the consumer, their ability to be able to trial things, learn and, you know, test quickly, learn quickly, fail quickly, and move on without learning. The way in which they every single aspect of the customer journey has an element of a data trail in it, so they can understand that from their various different perspectives. So direct to consumer is going to be a massive growth area. Interestingly, I think there'll be a number of direct to only consumer brands that will want a physical presence. Some of those presence might be on the big major high streets. They'll certainly be in some of the very large, high quality shopping centres that will clearly be looking out for a new mix of tenants as well. So there we are. 9 transformative arcs going from fast to fluid right the way through to direct. That will change the relationship that stores have with us as consumers, will change the economics of stores, will make stores be able to be more responsive to us, and will change retail as we go forward. I am absolutely of the belief that there is something in our DNA as human beings where we want to have a social interchange, and shopping is a fundamental part of that. I don't see stores disappearing. I see stores having a duality of function going forward. I see stores coming and going in exactly the ways that stores have come and gone across the centuries when they lost touch with what their consumers wanted. I see stores being a hybrid of things that are done physically and things that are done virtually. But I don't see the complete demise of the high street. But we should always remember that the future in this respect is certainly not what it used to be. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much indeed, to allow sufficient time for questions, debate, thoughts. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over back to you.
Thank you very much, David. Very insightful. So we have got a few questions on the chat box. We've got one question said that the businesses which are a small, medium businesses, which are a family-run business, is asking how would you suggest to incorporate such expensive technology or promote their business over online platform? What strategy should they incorporate?
Sure. Well, I think this current period has taught us, whether we're a large global chain or whether we're a small family business, that not having a digital strategy is just not tenable anymore. And you might think that as a small business that the large businesses have have got a distinct advantage over this. I can tell you that there are many large businesses that were really caught out, that didn't have a digital strategy, really, that didn't have digital routes to marketplace, that spent 6-7 months really struggling on this. Of course, a larger business has greater capital to be able to, certainly greater working capital to be able to understand what to do and to do it quickly. But I think one of the great levelers of digital technology is that these days you don't need to be a massive corporation or have massive great big bank balances to be able to play in the digital space, and to be able to have a good social presence through Twitter and through Instagram and what have you is not an expensive operation. But what you do need is you need good people who understand how those types of platforms work, the best way of engaging with those types of platforms, and to be creating interesting content that people want to engage with. I think that's probably one of the key things that I would say to you, which is these platforms allow you to have a one-on-one relationship with either your current existing customers and importantly, potentially new customers. But it is only a platform, and the content that you put on that platform is very much up, in your hands. And to understand what content's working, what works for you, how to create engaging content is a journey that you have to take. And as I say, I don't think it has to be particularly expensive. I mean, we've all learned over the course of the last year that, and I say it's in the best way, that scrappy sort of broadcasts and videos that you take on your phone are very acceptable. Maybe that might change in a couple of years' time, but we've all learned that as I say, being quick and fast and nimble is much better than being slow and never happening. So I would take a great deal of inspiration in that it is possible for you to create really interesting, engaging, intriguing content yourselves. It's very important that you, if you haven't got it, that you get, email addresses, Twitter addresses, etc., of every customer that you have an interaction with, in a way that they find rewarding, to give you that type of access to them, that you appreciate that everyone has limited amount of time, and that you communicate with them with things that you think that they feel are going to be relevant and interesting, and you do it in a very engaging way. I think now the opportunities are almost limitless, and the cost of engaging in all this is really something that is not just for big or medium-sized companies anymore. It is for absolutely everybody. Sorry, I can't hear you for some reason.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you very much, David. We've got another question. With your point for all POS moving to digital, do you mean for promotions only, or for the fabricated stands that product are on?
Right, good question. I think the two things over time are going to be indistinguishable from each other. The fabric, having seen some of the new developments of some of the people that are creating the fabrications of, the metalwork that goes into POS, shelf displays, etc. That is now being built and fabricated to be in itself digitally enabled. From from having digitally enabled pricing tickets that you can instantly sort of change. Now, if you're a big, great big retailer, or even a retailer that has 2 or 3 stores, to do that centrally as opposed to having to do that on a store-by-store basis. So that's being fabricated into the POS itself. Robust digital screens being fabricated at manufacture as opposed to being fitted afterwards. And the same with some of the freestanding POS, which again is going to go digital. Now, there are a number of drivers of why it's going to go digital, and actually the environmental push, and quite rightly so, is also a factor that is going in that dimension, which is it's pretty environmentally destructive to create all this point of sale material. Some of it recyclable, some of it isn't. It's in the stores for a month at most before it's either promotion's over or it's kicked to pieces and just has no life left, and then it's literally thrown out, and some of it gets recycled, some of it goes to landfill. It's not a sustainable way of doing things. So again, there's a lot of push for that. There's also a lot of push for the actual displays to be created from sustainable materials. So there's a really, really interesting trial that's happened in South Africa with a largest pharmaceutical retailer, Dischem, where actually they're taking filling containers. They're being recycled. So Tetra Packs, taking old Tetra Packs being recycled, and those Tetra Packs themselves are being used to fabricate temporary display materials. So I think in all of those dimensions, those things are happening.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah, I've got one more question. I know 2 more. We have another one. Says, what opportunity do you think that there are for retail architectural designer? Do you think brands are moving from more permanent fixed facilities and big brand homes to a more transient pop-up environment?
Really good question. I think it's a really interesting time for store design, because store design has pretty much been based on yesterday's rules, and now we're going to have rules for tomorrow, which are, as I say, are emerging. And it comes back to, I think, what we talked about right at the very beginning, which is this whole notion of things needing to be relatively fluid. And I think the same is going to apply to the way in which stores are designed. The store itself is going to have to be a much more fluid type of structure. Things are going to be moved and changed. I think it's going to be for quite some time going forward. There'll be times when social distancing will be increased, social distancing will be narrowed. The store itself is going to have to be able to cope with that in a much more fluid way than it does at the moment. I think the days of designing a store, putting all the fixturization in and leaving it for 6-7 years until that fixturization has been written off before you can start to change that. Those days are over. And store designers are going to have to think from the very beginning of how do they create much more fluid environments, and also different types of formats. Maybe formats that are completely self-serve. I don't know how many of you have tried the new Amazon Go store in the UK. I've experienced it many times in the States, especially with the Amazon team when it was launched. That's a different sort of concept in a sense, where you're designing a store that doesn't have that many people in it. There are a couple of really interesting store designs in France from some of the big supermarkets that are literally sort of container-like stores that are open 24 hours a day, that literally have no people in them whatsoever, and controlled by the way in which you can observe people in one form or another wandering around the container and picking things up. The way in which Amazon are doing it is via visual compute, which we talked about it. That's inherently expensive. There are a lot of other alternative solutions now, some around weight, some around various different tags that are tracked around the store, that are going to reduce the cost of that type of technology significantly. So that type of technology applied into stores, again, is going to change the physical nature of the way in which the store is constructed around a particular journey that ends in a till. And that, I think, would also create much more interesting, much more fluid store designs that great creative store designers, I think, will enjoy having those constraints off, and we as shoppers, I think, will enjoy shopping in more different environments, less sort of cookie cutter ways of store journeys.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, says David. Another David, thank you. It says, do you see a form or programmatic advertising being used within the store, or maybe through mobile phone, Bluetooth connections or equivalent?
Also a very interesting question. So programmatic digital buying has increased exponentially, certainly over the last 3 years. Obviously, it's been going around for longer than that, but over the last 3 years, there's been a significant increase in the inventory available to be bought and sold programmatically, and also a greater sophistication in the programmatic engines that both retailers, brand owners, advertisers, media owners, and media buyers, like our media buying companies across WPP, are using and have access to, and the data is flowing around for those. Programmatic per se is only going to grow even more, and the question is interesting and right in that respect, that the screen, let's call them screens for want of a better term, that we will see in stores over time will be opened up to be bought programmatically. Now, there are a few issues around that, which is clearly, if I don't know, I'll give an example of the large retailers, but it applies to smaller ones as well. But if Tesco's opens up their point of sale screens programmatically, the last thing they want is an ad from Sainsbury's price comparing. So there are issues around how it all gets opened up and the constraints around that. There will be issues around monopolistic practices around how you open it up, and whether you will be allowed to open up for some and not for others on a programmatic basis. But I think when you look at the direction of travel, every single digital screen opportunity will be smart, and it will have a programmatic capability to it. Now, it requires faster processors, it requires an upgrading of the silicon, it requires relatively faster connections, it requires edge communication, etc. But the direction of travel, I think, is set. How long it takes to get there, I think, is the question, but certainly not the direction of travel.
Thank you very much. We have another question that says, do you see Amazon approach with no tills being something applicable on a larger scale?
Sorry, Amazon
approach with no tills.
Yes, I do, because to be honest, as an ex-retailer myself, the tills were always and is still a crunch point in the store. No consumers likes. You never ever have the right number of tills for the right number of customers at the right time. That's one of the laws of retailing. And many people have tried to create these wonderful algorithms, but things happen, relatively quickly, and it doesn't take too long suddenly for large queues to emerge. So it's a point of massive friction. And of course, what great retailers have been doing, and what all this technology allows us to do, is to reduce the friction within the whole process. Now, if you take the concept, this is a lecture, and say, right, I'd be happy to do it at another time, which is the whole notion of new retail, which is a concept that was very much created and invented by Jack Ma of Alibaba. And in essence, new retail is the notion of digitizing from a retail perspective, your entire supply chain, the entire process, including the supply chain. And when you do that, that gives you a whole series of abilities to be able to reduce friction via technology in lots of different ways. Now, creating stores without tills is not just a function of clever, sophisticated technology that in one form or another enables you to track what a customer is doing, lifting, putting up, putting in their pockets or proverbial baskets, and then being able to account for it. You also need to have a lot of digitization within the supply chain to enable you to do it. So just for an example, if part of the process of not having tills in the store relates to the weight of an object, well, you can't do that unless you absolutely know the precise weights of every single object and every single SKU you have in the store. And for many databases, the weight simply isn't there at the moment, or if it is, it's done on a case basis, for transportation, as opposed to a single SKU basis for things like that. So again, I think the direction of travel is inevitable. The tills will go automatic. It requires significant investment at the moment, so it's not for the small retailers at the moment, but that will change over time. and the likes of Amazon and the likes of Alibaba. You've got to think of those people as more as technology companies than as retailers, and they will want to create products to sell to other retailers that incorporate all this type of technology. So yes, Amazon are doing this because it's good, it's interesting for their business, but they're also doing it with an eye to the future. Is actually, well, they could sell all these technologies to all the retailers around the world, and that'll be another source of amazing revenue and information for you. I've got to say, having frequented Amazon Go a number of times when I've been in Atlanta with the Amazon team, I've got to say, the first time you do it, you actually do feel like you're a shoplifter, and you feel unbelievably guilty walking out of the store and not actually handing over any money or showing somebody your items. But having, once you do it over 2 or 3 times, it's amazing how you get used to it. And again, it just, from a customer perspective, it takes away, the ultimate friction point, and that's got to be a good thing. Customers will love it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I don't see more questions yet. Any more questions? Anyone you want to raise, David? Thank you very much, David, for very insightful. We've got so many thank you coming through the chat box. Thank you very much for your insightful session. Very helpful, very rich conversation. Thank you very much.
I know everyone's very busy people, so I appreciate the time that you've invested in this as well. So thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much. You have a very good day. Thank you everyone for attending the session. The video will be available, the record will be available on Brunel Hive in YouTube line. Thank you for coming. It was a great pleasure to have you, David, here. Thank you very much again.
Pleasure. Great day.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, David. Bye.
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 Bye.